guys, I hope you're doing well. I wanted to take a few minutes and review the perspectives of psychology. Now, if you get anything out of the next 15 or 16 weeks together, it's how essential and how crucial the perspectives of psychology are in terms of identifying, predicting, and explaining human behavior. Now, the things I want to emphasize is that of these 7, not one is right and not one is wrong. It all depends upon your values, your morals, and your beliefs, and obviously the individual that you're working with in terms of helping them understand overall human behavior. Now, in terms of our learning objectives together for this power slide here, our goals are to identify the perspectives of psychology, to have a good idea in terms of how we describe the perspectives of psychology, and then most importantly, how we go about applying the perspectives of psychology. Now, the first perspective is the biological perspective. Now, when you think of the biological perspective, I want you to think inside. So we're going to use a common theme in terms of talking about mental health, for example, anxiety or depression. So things that may contribute to anxiety or depression from a biological perspective are things inside of us, hormones, neurotransmitters. So we may give someone medication such as Prozac or Zoloft to work with or contribute to that person feeling better. The next perspective is the cognitive perspective. The cognitive perspective deals with this. So how is it that we're thinking? Our memory, our problem solving. So in terms of explaining human behavior, we would think about negative thinking, irrational thinking, or even how is that person perceiving themselves overall. Our next perspective is the behavioral perspective. Now, whenever you think of the behavioral perspective, I want you to think about the environment. So things such as classical conditioning or operative conditioning. Things such as negative reinforcement, positive reinforcement. How will our environment influence our overall behavior? Our next perspective is the humanistic perspective. And this talks about human development or human behavior in terms of motivation, in terms of self-esteem, or even things such as self-actualization. So myself and you, based upon our socialization experiences, both positive and negative, self-actualize. Think of Harlow's or Maslow's hierarchy of needs, so to speak. So this idea that we have free will, resilience, personal potential. So our human behavior is based upon our ability to self-actualize. Our next perspective is a psychodynamic perspective, and anytime you see this one, I want you to think of Freud. So our human behavior is based upon our childhood experiences, our unconscious conflict. So the ways in which we act as an adult have very much to do with what happened to us when we were a child. And now, based upon those circumstances, it now presents itself in unconscious conflict. So we may help a person better understand themselves, what we mean by insight, through a very long therapeutic process where we may go back and talk about some of those instances and may even bring up or discuss things such as defense mechanisms. Our next perspective is the evolutionary perspective. And whenever you think of the evolutionary perspective, the first thing that pops up to my mind is Darwin. So human behaviors today served an evolutionary purpose, this idea of natural selection. So it's not uncommon that I'll have a student or a client sit across from me and say, I shouldn't feel anxious or I shouldn't feel sad. And I say, well, you should. It becomes a challenge when those things get a little out of control. But the idea from an evolutionary perspective is that we are who we are based upon challenges each generation faced, for an example, in terms of survival and reproduction. Our last perspective is a socio-cultural perspective. Whenever you think of this one, think of cultural factors. So we act the way in which we do based upon things such as race, social norms, gender identity. So you may be demonstrating maladaptive or abnormality based upon the cultural factors surrounding you. Maybe you identify with a specific kind of race or ethnicity, and it may simply just not be accepted within that cultural social norm. We could say that is dictating your overall human behavior. Now, as I mentioned before, we have seven perspectives of psychology. Not one is right and not one is wrong. It all really depends upon you. Now, a common question I often get from students is, again, which one of those seven or combination is the best? Well, within the field, when we talk about human services, we talk about nursing, we talk about mental health counseling, we talk about case management, any of those types of things, we talk about the biopsychosocial approach. And the biopsychosocial approach simply says we consider everything. We consider a complex, dynamic mix of variables. So if someone comes to me and I'm looking to best meet the needs of an individual, I think to myself, biologically, what is going on? Cognitively, what is that person thinking? And socioculturally, what is going on within the environment that may be contributing to that particular person's human behavior? So I hope this provided you a nice summary of the 7 perspectives of psychology and adding on that biopsychosocial approach as we move forward over the next several weeks here in general psychology. Thank you.